Silence, please. All rise.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this historic courtroom, the seat of the Supreme Court of Ireland since the courts returned to the Four Courts in 1932 after the reconstruction of the building. In particular, welcome to those who are lucky enough to be in the courtroom this morning or this afternoon to be called to the bar, but also a warm welcome to those who are in attendance remotely. This is the first day on which it's been the case that it has been possible to participate, albeit remotely, in a ceremony for the call to the bar. I know many of those who may be participating remotely would have very much preferred to be here, but I was very determined that every person who wished to have a physical call in this historic courtroom should have that opportunity, and given the numbers who had opted for that, given social distancing and the maximum number that can be included in each batch and the available time, it was just not possible to make arrangements to have anyone in the room other than those who are being called to the bar. But given those unusual circumstances, I think the ceremony will be as close as possible to that which happens in ordinary times. And I know that all bar one of those who are involved in this call have come through the education course in King's Inn, so I might be forgiven if my remarks are somewhat biased in favour of that cohort. This is a short formal ceremony, but it is one of great significance. The call to the bar does signal an important step in the life of every graduate. It may indeed mark the first step towards a career practising at the bar, which is a challenging and demanding profession, but nonetheless one which has the potential to provide a very satisfying career. And today you join a profession with a long history, but one which is also, in my view, of very considerable contemporary importance. A membership of the profession brings with it a duty to promote and uphold the rule of law. And John Philpott Curran, who was an inspirational Irish barrister of over 200 years ago, in a speech in 1790, gave rise to the root of the famous quotation that eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. And I think those words of his summarise the raison d'etre of a legal profession in a modern democratic society, and also the work which lies ahead of each barrister in defending liberty and promoting the rule of law. I did say earlier that the bar remains a profession of considerable importance in contemporary Ireland. The existence of an independent legal profession to put forward the cases of litigants before our courts is a vital part of our system. And the role of an independent judiciary in promoting the rule of law would be significantly impaired if that independent judiciary did not have available to it an independent legal profession prepared to undertake difficult and sometimes indeed unpopular cases in a way that ensures that the judge or jury, where there is one, ultimately has all of the facts and arguments available to come to a just conclusion in accordance with law. And in that context, it's vital that you maintain a thorough knowledge of the law, not just for the purposes of advising your clients, but also for the purposes of assisting the court in ensuring that the law is properly applied. That remains an important duty of each barrister. Now, I think the fact that you're here today confirms that you have already demonstrated that you have acquired a thorough knowledge of the law, but it has to be said that in a constantly changing and evolving legal framework, it remains vital that you renew and extend that knowledge as your practice develops. It's also of the utmost importance that you adhere to the highest ethical standards. Our court system is dependent on judges being able to trust counsel, and once lost, that trust is very hard to restore. And it's also important to remember that the perception which every member of the public has of the profession of barrister very much depends on the experiences which clients or others have in their individual encounters with members of the bar. As barristers, your first obligation, of course, is to your own client, to be courteous but courageous in the way in which you advance that client's case. but also, importantly, to do so within the bounds of the rules of ethics and your many duties to the court. That being said, I would now call each graduate individually to the Bar of Ireland. Joseph Keogh. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Katrina Cannon. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you may take your place accordingly. Heather McKenna Furlong. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Shane Mulcahy. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you may take your place accordingly. Liam M. O'Brien. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you may take your place accordingly. Peter Cunningham. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you may take your place accordingly. Colm Davis. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you may take your place accordingly. Katie May McCarthy. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you may take your place accordingly. Alan Briddock. The benchers of the Honourable Society of King's Inns, having been pleased to admit you to the degree of Barrister at Law, I now admit you to practice in the Courts of Ireland, and you will take your place accordingly. Now, each new graduate having been called to the Bar of Ireland and now being properly called barristers is entitled to practice in all of the Courts of Ireland, including here in this Supreme Court. And to illustrate that new status and right of audience, I will ask each newly called member of the Bar whether they wish to move anything before the Court this afternoon. Mr. Keogh, do you move anything? Ms. Cannon, do you move anything? Ms. McKenna Furlong, do you move anything? Mr. Mulcahy, do you move anything? Mr. O'Brien, do you move anything? Mr. Cunningham, do you move anything? Mr. Davis, do you move anything? Ms. McCarthy, do you move anything? Mr. Briddock, do you move anything? And that concludes this short, formal but important ceremony. It only remains for me on my own behalf, but also on behalf of all of the other judges of the Supreme Court who in more normal times would be in many numbers sitting here beside me on the bench, to offer each of you our sincere congratulations and wish you every success and happiness in the future.
All right.